So Joshua chapter 6. There is absolutely zip segue, so I'll just shift without a clutch.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, we're 25 minutes late. I think we have over-exercised our right to fellowship.
You're not streaming though, are you?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we're just,
You know, Sue's sitting there going,
what in the world?
No, she's not.
Uh,
No, she doesn't know how to do that.
oh, how come you just set it up for her before you left?
Because she'd be calling him about now going, something happened.
I thought you actually, she's like, when she stays home, she tells you how the sound was with the music.
She does. That's because I put it on.
Okay.
I set it up.
Oh, but you didn't do that. Okay.
Where do you want to go next?
Okay, that's
Where do you
all
want to go
right.
next, TJ?
I want to go to Joshua. chapter 6.
That'd be a good thing.
I would think so.
All right. So Debbie, you're an endangered species today. You're a woman and you're here. You're healthy.
Page 117 in the...
I'm in a good mood.
Yeah. Well, you are unique.
How do you catch a unique rabbit?
You neek up on it.
Tell that one to Joshua, please.
You guys were involved in it. Wow.
All right, so I'm going to do 2 lessons in one shot here. We have a contrast between 2 cities. When last we left Joshua and his troops, they were heading across the river. You remember first we had the whole spying out the land and Rahab issue. We'll not go back there. Morning, Chris. And then we had, as everybody turns, I should know to keep my mouth shut. Anyway, and then we had the whole thing a couple weeks ago where they were crossing the river and they built they picked up a pile of rocks so that they could build a memorial altar on the west side of the Jordan River, as well as one in the middle of the Jordan River of rocks from the east side. So they just transferred a whole bunch of rocks around. So that's kind of where we left. Now, as they cross the river, they head to the city of Jericho. Jericho was a great walled city. It was one of those kind of wonder type of cities. It just had a huge wall that everybody in the city believed to be impervious, impermeable, take your pick, unsurmountable. They just figured they were safe inside, and they were going to be good, and they could just last out whatever Israel was planning for them. And so God came to Joshua with a battle plan. Now Joshua was he had already been the commander of the armies of Israel and had now moved into Moses' role as kind of like president, leader, figurehead, plus being still the military commander. And so Joshua had fought a few battles in his day already. And he had been through some interesting battles, tactics that God had used. You know, remember the whole hands up, hands down thing? Joshua was on the field as Moses was trying to keep his arms up. And so he'd already, I'm sure that was an interesting conversation. Mo, what happened? Well, Joe, I don't know. And so Joshua is preparing for this battle, and all of a sudden the angel of the Lord comes down. Very interesting statement there, because you get he is introduced to us as the angel of the Lord, and yet he receives Joshua's worship, which tells us it is not an actual angel, because angels nowhere in Scripture actually receive worship. It tells us it is whom? Jesus, right? God in the flesh. And that's one of those, we call him a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus, meaning before his birth. Jesus didn't get his first physical body when he was born. He had a physical body. He has always been God in the flesh. And so when you see God in the flesh, whether it's in the Garden of Eden, you have God in the flesh walking with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day, or you hear in Joshua, God in the flesh. You get in Genesis, 13, 14, 15 in that area, God in the flesh walking and talking with Abraham. All of these are these pre-incarnate or before his birth appearances of Jesus, because Jesus is God in the flesh.
First time I ever learned that.
Really?
First time in my life I ever put that together. Thank you.
I can't believe he looked like that, though. I mean, I don't know. I'm picturing Adam, say, 16, 18 years old, looking at Jesus as 27 or 30.
We don't know. I mean, we don't know what he looked like.
I would like to think that there should be an awe factor other than just seeing a normal 27-year-old guy. Say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I'm God."
Why would you say he's 27? I know he went.
Well, I'm thinking of Jesus through Scripture.
Right, through the Gospels. So Jesus was about 30 actually when he started his ministry, and he was about 33 or so when he died. What's that?
But that was as he was growing up.
Right, but what TJ's saying is that's how he's envisioning Jesus. How would Jesus look? You know, would you be getting the 30-year-old Jesus to Adam and Eve? You know, what did he look like pre-incarnate as opposed to post-incarnate?
It's not a real important.
I mean, we won't know because we don't know what he looked like. You know.
Picture some long-haired, brown-haired guy who looks like he's smoking a doobie.
Yeah, the hippie Jesus. You know, and that there is that picture is, you know, we get the picture of, you know, Jesus kind of like the homeless hippie who wandered around Jerusalem spouting maxims, you know, and that's not obviously an accurate picture, and yet that's part of what's in our mind. You get the other picture of Jesus, the effeminate guy with the halo, that, you know, came out of, to us through the Middle Ages, and is still used today, which is worse for pictures. Actually, I'll take the hippie over the, you know, the effeminate. You know, but we don't really have an idea of what Jesus looked like. We get clues throughout the Bible. We know that several places, Old and New Testament, said that he had no form or comeliness that we should desire him. He was just your average Jewish dude. You know, if he wouldn't stand out in the crowd. He didn't always wear white and blue, no matter what our flannel graphs say. You know, all of these things, you know, he had a beard. We know he had a beard because they pulled it out. You can't take out what's not there. You know, so we don't know, you know, what he looked, you know, the whole curly thing, probably the whole fringe thing on the clothes. Yeah, probably, you know, he was just your completely average, which is just the mind-boggling part of it. The God was completely average when he comes in the flesh. That there was nothing to
He would never draw attention to
commend.
himself. It's not like, hey, look at me, I'm here.
Right.
It was just, I'm doing what I gotta do.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'm thinking in
Right, I know.
But you think in other places, Isaiah, you know, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up. And all of a sudden you get this picture of Jesus in Isaiah and in Daniel and in Revelation where, you know, his skin glows and his eyes are fire and his feet are brass, and he just puts a whooping on anybody and everybody who stands in his way. There is that picture of Jesus as well. It's not the marginalized peasant. It is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And there's where it's hard to miss.
not so weak, is he?
Not so, well, yeah, still meek, because meek is power under control. You know, not so lowly, certainly. You know, here is Jesus. And so we have to see both. It's not enough to see Jesus. You know, some people see Jesus as our example and his earthly ministry. He provided that, a lot of things for us to learn from. And he is an example. We see him as our Savior on the cross, but we have to remember that we also see him as our King. And those three pictures are very different, and yet they are all accurate. And we need all three of them to really have a healthy perspective of who he is and what he's doing. But yeah, so in Joshua's day, you have Jesus just, again, in that very unsung hero role, just that, you know, show up, nothing out of the ordinary. What's interesting to note, though he shows up in that way, people who are tuned in know who he is. Abraham, the angels appeared to him flat on his face. You know, Joshua here, the angel appears to him, and once he figures out what it is, you know, his first question is, you know, who are you on our side or their side? He goes, no, I am your side, flat on his face. You know, and so here, and so he comes to Joshua with this interesting battle scenario, and how many of you know this from years ago? Because it's a great, brilliant tactical move for a walled city. Walk around it. Let's be honest, that's about as dumb as it gets as far as human perspective battle tactics. You know, the great General Norman Schwarzkopf never said, let's just walk around Iraq and hope it falls apart. I mean, he could have and it would have, but that's besides the point. And so you get this idea, and so he says, just take, you know, every day, take a lap around the city, go back to camp. Don't say anything, don't talk, just be quiet. You know, and so you have the clinking of armor as the guys just walk around the city and they go back. And you had to think the people in Jericho had to have been really, you know, confused as this was going on. So, you know, here's Joshua getting these instructions as a already, you know, commanded troops in battle going, Lord, I don't mean to second guess here, but shouldn't we have like logs to crush gates, or shields to block arrows and hot tar, or archers to launch stuff, or machines to throw stuff, or shouldn't we just camp around it and not let anybody in or out for a year and do some siege warfare? There are a lot of ways to attack a city. Walking around it is not typically one of it. And so he goes, do this for 6 days, and then on day 7, I want you to take 7 laps around. He said, and then I want everybody to look at the city and just yell. Okay, that's the battle plan. We just surround it and we holler at it.
How many people? About 2 million?
Well, you figure if there was 2.5 million Jews at the time, their standing army was maybe 500,000, give or take. It's just totally, yeah. That's a guesswork, but yeah. Yeah, so there was, if we were trying to scientifically, turn this into an episode of, what is that?
Was it 10.2?
Yeah. And so he says, just surround the city and then yell at it, and then just go in and attack. And so Joshua, got these orders. And what we see here, and there's a couple points in your notes for lesson 5. First of all, obey God even when it seems illogical. Okay, this seems illogical. There's no doubt about it. And then the instruction was to go forward, once the walls came down, to go forward and kill everything. Like everything except Rahab and her family. That was it. But no men, no women, no sheep, no animals, burn everything. No wealth was to leave the city. And God said, this is the first fruits of the land of Canaan. This is mine. You're going to tithe this city to me. There will be other cities, and you will get spoil, and you will get slaves, and you will get animals. But this city, it's all mine. Everything dies. And so that seems harsh. And in our era of political correctness, this seems barbaric. There's no way around it. And the fact that, that God was going to give this instruction more than once, that he was cleaning out a trail of Canaan, and they weren't to leave anybody alive. That seems very harsh. We don't understand why that is, and yet what we see, the simple explanation, the short explanation, is that what we see is God's justice at work. The entire land of Canaan was so debauched and so irredeemable that God said the only thing left, because everyone is guilty, is to destroy them and start over. And so it wasn't just a matter of he was giving the Israelites a new home and they were doing genocide because the Israelites needed the place. They were doing justice because the place had already turned its back so thoroughly against God. And so there's a lot to it, but that's the short, kind of quicker answer as to what was going on. And so the second point is obey God even when it seems harsh. Sometimes God will tell us things that just seem harsh, and we need to worry about obeying him. And then proclaim God's message even when it promises judgment. Part of what we do as Christians is tell people how to get to heaven because they're going to hell. And that's not popular to say. Like I said, it's more popular to tell somebody to go to hell than it is to tell them they're going to hell. Amen. And it's just a weirdness in our society, but we need to be faithful in proclaiming God's message even when that message promises judgment. People need to know. And so in Jericho, the way that it played out was they walked around the city, they yelled at the city, the walls fell down, providing a nice little ramp. Everybody went forward, and they killed and destroyed almost everything. Almost. Rahab was an exception, her family and her stuff, that was good, God was good with that. But there was one guy who decided, look at all this gold laying around and nobody alive to defend it. I think I'll take some. And look at these nice clothes. I think that would look good on me. I could be the first to wear Canaanite fashion. And so he took them, took some clothes, took some of the wealth, and he took it back with him. Now, how you sneak that out of a city under your skirt, I don't know, but he did. And so takes him back to his tent. The city that was next after Jericho was a little city called Ai, barely a city. It wasn't a defended city. And it was such a place that Joshua was looking at this as the commander going, I don't need to mobilize and send the entire army over here to deal with AI. I just need to send a few people. We'll just send, we'll send a battalion over there. They'll deal with it and they'll come back. So the battalion goes over to AI and they get their head handed to them. Literally, first Jewish deaths in battle happen at AI. And so suddenly they come literally running back with their tail between their legs and going, what happened? And everybody freaked out, Joshua included, going, God, what are you doing? People died here. Like battle, that happens. But, we lost this battle to this piddly little city. I mean, we outnumbered them 4-1 and they beat us. What is going on? And they needed to figure it out. And what turns out to happen is a guy named Achan had taken some of the stuff that God said, this is my tithe, this city, everything is mine. He had taken some gold, he had taken some clothes. And what we find, the lesson that we find in AI is that personal disobedience angers God. God didn't take it lightly. Yeah, it was just a few clothes and it was just a little bit of money, but it angers him when we disobey. We know this because we teach it to our children. You must obey. And then we turn around sometimes, if we're honest, and we do the exact opposite. And that's just, I do it too. I teach my children to obey their dad, and I turn around and I disobey my father. Not surprising then that he might get a little ticked, just like I get a little ticked when I'm disregarded and disobeyed. Personal disobedience angers God. And then what we find, the process then was, in AI, as they figured out what was going on, Joshua says, okay, we'll draw straws and we'll figure out which tribe it is. And they figure out which tribe it is, and then they draw straws and they figure out which family it is. And then they draw straws and they figure out which person it is. And finally they get to Achan and they're like, you're guilty, what'd you do? Achan's like, all right, I kind of stole some stuff and it's buried under my tent. They go out and they get it and they take him and they take his wife and they take his kids and they take all of his possessions and they throw it in a pit and they bury them alive with rocks. They stone him. Not the good kind of stoning, the bad kind of stoning. And they literally, because he had disobeyed God, God said, justice must be done. I mean, this isn't like, you stole from somebody else. This is you stole from God. That was just not smart. And yet he did. And so God says, penalty is death for all of you. And so Achan got stoned. His family got stoned. And the lesson is that personal disobedience affects others, especially as parents and especially as guys, as dads and as husbands. Our disobedience to God, it may not be so dramatic as our kids taken out and getting stoned, and yet it does affect them. And it affects them negatively because the consequences that God gives us oftentimes ripple down and impact our children. The choices we make have that capacity. And it sucks, let's be honest. There's no two ways around it because, if I'm guilty before God, I want God to deal with me. Leave my kids out of it. And yet God says, no, you kind of brought them along with you, and whatever impact you have, you share. And so we need to just be aware of that personal disobedience affects others. And then personal disobedience can lead to public judgment. People see when God disciplines us. And they certainly saw it in Achan and in the death that happened there. And so God deals harshly with our disobedience. So on the one hand, in Joshua 6, you get obedience and its importance. And on Joshua 7, you get the impact of disobedience. And that's why I tried to do these two together. That way I want to get back on track. But they work really well together. The end of the story is, after they deal with Achan, Joshua takes the entire army over to Ai and just obliterates it. So they did win, and they did continue to march on. But obedience is critically important, and disobedience is very problematic, and God will deal with it. And even as adults, sometimes we overlook that. We're better than that. We forget it. We need to remember God takes it very seriously. All right. Father, we thank you for the day. Help us to learn these lessons, to internalize them, to apply them. In Jesus' good name, amen. All right.